It's deep January, and the train travels from Krakow to Zakopane, into the heart of the Carpathians. The snow lies so deep here that houses are buried to their roofs. In every village you pass, you see snowshoes, on the doors of huts, on fences. Everywhere people work and must walk through snow. Beside you sits a woman with large, broad hands, whose nails aren't broken but short and filed, practical, industrious. Around her are snowshoes, several pairs in different sizes, different woods. Her name is Zofia, and she's made snowshoes her whole life. She's 77 years old, and her workshop stands in an old house in the mountains above Zakopane at 1,200 meters elevation. She was born there, lived her whole life there, never left the mountain except for the weekly market in the village. She shows you a pair of snowshoes in her hand. They're made of hazelwood and leather, with interwoven patterns like lace. The wooden frame is arched, elegant, functional, a work of art and a tool at once. She explains that hazel is the best wood for snowshoes. It's hard enough not to break, but flexible enough to dance with the snow. It's the wood her grandfather used, and his grandfather before him. When you walk in snowshoes, she says, you don't walk over the snow, you dance with it. You become one with the mountain. The design of a snowshoe isn't simple, she explains carefully. You need the right length. Too short and your feet sink in. Too long and you trip over yourself. You need the right width. Too wide and you waste energy walking. Your hips hurt after an hour. Too narrow and you sink again. And then the heel. It must have good heel support without squeezing the foot, because squeezing means cutting off blood vessels, toes freezing. She shows you the old templates she uses, paper patterns, hundreds of them, for different shoe sizes, different body types, different kinds of snow. There are different kinds of snow, she explains. Wet snow in spring, dry powder in winter, packed snow in the lowlands. Each kind needs a different shoe. She intuitively knows which template is right for which person. She looks at your legs and feet, and she immediately knows your size. Making snowshoes takes at least 3 to 4 days per pair, she says with proud slowness. The first day she splits the wood from the log, manually shapes the frame, bends it over steam. The wood must be warm and pliable, almost alive, as if breathing. She holds it in this warm, bent shape through a whole night, so the wood remembers its new form, so it doesn't curl back to its original state. On the second day, she sands the edges, makes them smooth, silk smooth. On the third day, she braids the leather webbing between the wooden frames. The leather must be cut by hand, pulled by hand, braided by hand. Hour after hour, her hands working, her mind meditating. It's repetitive, but not monotonous, she says. With every hole she makes, she thinks of the foot that will step into this shoe. She often never meets the buyers, she says, but she makes every shoe for a specific, imaginary person. A young hunter with broad shoulders, an old woman with arthritic ankles, a child learning to walk who must not fall. She tells of an old hunter who came to her, 70 years old, with knees that wouldn't work anymore. His whole life he'd been in the mountains, and now he couldn't walk. She made him a pair of snowshoes with extra foot support, extra stability. She made them light, lighter than she'd ever made, because she wanted this man to walk again, to not give up. The man came back 2 weeks later with tears in his eyes. He'd been in the mountains again. He was a hunter again. That's the best compliment Sophia ever received. The train climbs higher into the mountains, and the landscape becomes wilder, more primal. Snow falls again, large, slow flakes, and the trees are covered in ice, so they look like living crystals. Sophia shows you photographs of her mountain, the house, the workshop, images of her much younger, with snow up to her hips. She tells you that in hard winters, when the snow is very deep, people contact her because they need snowshoes just to get home. Snowshoes aren't luxury. They're survival equipment in the mountains. She tells of her father, who also made snowshoes, and her grandfather, and her great-grandfather. There are records that Zofia's family has made snowshoes for at least 200 years. She keeps old snowshoes in a cabinet from her grandparents' time, still intact, still functional. She could wear these old shoes, but she won't. She wants to preserve them for history. Sometimes she shows them to buyers and says, "These shoes are 200 years old. These shoes have crossed mountains, have saved lives, have helped people survive." The buyers understand then that they're not just buying shoes, they're buying continuity, a connection to the past. She shows you her hands up close. They're hardened by work, the fingertips thickened, scarred. But the hands aren't old. The hands are alive, industrious, strong. She says these are the hands of a craftswoman, and she's proud of them. These hands have made thousands of pairs of snowshoes. These hands have helped people walk in the mountains, to hunt, to survive. There are people whose lives depend on Sophia making her snowshoes correctly. That's not a light responsibility, she says, but it's one she gladly carries. The train slows, and you're nearly at Zakopane. Sophia gathers the snowshoes, arranges them carefully, as if they're children she's about to say goodbye to. She tells you that each pair has a small label on the inside, with her name and the date the shoes were made. That's her signature, her guarantee. She says snowshoes last 100 years if you care for them properly. This isn't just marketing, it's the truth. She still has snowshoes from her grandfather being worn. Before you fall asleep, Sophia gives you a small amulet, a tiny snowshoe made of hazelwood on a leather cord. She says, "This is for your safety. Wear it when you travel in cold lands. When you wear it, your feet will stay warm and you won't fall." You accept the amulet, and it's so light that at first you think it's empty. But no, it's truly a tiny snowshoe, perfectly made, perfectly proportioned, a miniature of a centuries-old craft tradition. The train comes to a stop in Zakopane, and the windows are full of snow, of mountains, of the scent of evergreen forests. You fall asleep with the amulet in your hand, and you dream of endless white landscapes, of the sound of snowshoes on frozen snow, of Sophia's hands working for you, even in dreams. The old man sits by the window, and on his lap sleeps a small boy, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, completely relaxed in the way only children can be. The child has rested his head against the grandfather's chest, against a place that feels safe, a place that means protection. One small hand grips the lapel of his dark jumper, holding on even in sleep, knowing instinctively that this is where he belongs. They're old together, this man and this child, bound by blood and time, in a way that's timeless, that speaks to eternal truth. You board at Passau, and autumn wraps around the train like a warm coat. The light is orange and red, and it falls gently through the windows. The grandfather doesn't look up as you enter. His whole attention lies with the child, with the security of that small body resting so trustfully against him. The grandfather is a large man, with a face that tells many years, decades of living and loving and loss carved into the lines that run from his eyes to his cheeks. His eyes are blue, a soft blue you only see in certain older people, a crystalline blue, the color of someone who's been allowed to see much and learn much. But now those eyes are almost closed, half open, half sleeping himself. He's watching the boy sleep. That's his whole task on this journey, you understand. That's all he needs to do. Everything else can wait. The boy sleeps deep and safe, completely relaxed, without fear, without worry. His breathing is steady, a gentle in and out, the rhythm of someone at peace. His hair is dark brown, with a slight curl, soft and fine, tousled across his forehead. There's chocolate on his chin, remnants from a while back perhaps, from before he grew tired, when he was still awake, when the day still promised adventure, when the world was still large and full of wonders. It's a sweet detail, a detail that shows this boy is a normal child, that he lives, that he plays. The grandfather moves barely at all, sits perfectly still. Only his breathing moves his body gently up and down. He knows instinctively that any larger movement might wake the child, might break this perfect peace. This is a kind of yoga, a form of meditation, a sacred practice. Stillness, presence, attention. It's hard to sit so still, very hard indeed. But old men have learned to do this, have spent decades mastering it. They've learned patience, learned that patience is a form of love. You wonder where they're coming from and where they're going. A visit? A holiday together? A routine trip for them? Something everyday and ordinary? Or is this something special? This time together on the train? This journey? This being with each other? Perhaps it's the first time the boy has visited his grandfather. The first time he's made this journey. Perhaps it's something they do every summer, a tradition that binds them. Perhaps it's the last time the grandfather and this boy will ever be together. Perhaps it's one of many, one of countless moments they'll share. It doesn't matter, not really. The moment is now, here, on this train, in this compartment, and the moment is perfectly real, more real than anything else, more important than anything else. The train sways gently, rhythmically, like a metronome, like a heartbeat. The rhythm is like a lullaby, a cradle song the mother once sang, and you can understand why the child fell asleep so quickly. This is a safe place, a truly safe place, protected, secure. And the grandfather is a safe person, someone you can trust. You see it clearly in the way he holds the child, in the way his body curves gently around him like protection, like a wall against the world outside. This is love in its purest form. The boy's other hand rests against the window, open, flat against the cool glass. His finger stretches out, almost touching the pane, as though he wanted to reach the world beyond, to grasp the landscape outside, the trees and fields and distant sky. But he's grown too tired. Sleep has overwhelmed him like a gentle wave. The thought remained, but the action was never completed. That's all right. There's time for it. There's always time. The grandfather will make sure there's enough time for everything that matters. The grandfather breathes deeply, slowly, consciously. It's not a sigh of sadness or frustration, but it's a breath that speaks, that expresses, that says, yes, this is enough. This is more than enough. This is the whole of life, compressed into this single moment. This is the essence of everything that matters. A child sleeps safely and trustingly in his arms, and an old man fulfills his purpose on this earth, his task, his reason to be. You wonder how many times the grandfather has held children as they slept on his lap. Perhaps once they were his own children, long ago, in another life almost. Perhaps they were his grandchildren, a succession of them, growing and maturing and going their own ways over the years. And now, here is this boy, this small person who trusts, who relaxes, who sleeps on his grandfather. And the grandfather sits perfectly still, completely conscious, completely present, completely grateful for this moment, which might not have been, but is. The autumn landscape slides past. Great trees whose leaves turn red and gold. Fields now empty where corn once grew. A few cottages with dark roofs. You see it all blurred because the windows are misted with breath and warmth. It's like looking through a dream. The boy snuffles softly, a tiny sound, so small and innocent. The grandfather shifts him slightly, not much, just enough to make him more comfortable. The boy's hand stays on his jumper. It's an anchor, something the child clings to, even in sleep. You realize you yourself are growing relaxed, that your shoulders are dropping, that your breathing is slowing. This peace is contagious, this stillness, this quiet. When you see a grandfather and his grandchild who are completely at ease, who are in absolute peace, it's easy to find peace yourself. That's the secret of this moment. That's what train journeys sometimes reveal, if you pay attention. That it's possible simply to be present, simply to be with someone else, without words, without drama, without demands. That's all you need. That's all life can be. The grandfather glances up briefly, not at you, but out the window into the passing countryside. His gaze is distant, though tired. He's thinking of something far away. Or perhaps he's thinking of nothing at all. Perhaps his mind is completely empty and filled only with love and responsibility and joy. Then he looks back at the child, that small face pressed against him. It's an image you won't forget. You know that already with absolute certainty. It will haunt you, will remind you of home, of love, of what family means. An old man with a sleeping boy on his lap, on a train to Linz, in an autumn that's quiet, that breeds peace with every breath. It's an icon of humanity, an archetypal image that takes its place in your soul and never leaves again. This is what's essential. This is what life is about. The train slows, gradually, brakes, pulls into Linz station. The grandfather doesn't really open his eyes, not fully. He remains where he is, completely with the child, in this stillness that's absolute, that's complete. And you close your eyes and dream of the safety of great, strong, old arms, of the weight of a love that needs no words, that doesn't need to explain itself, that simply is, that's true. Imagine yourself on the train from Emden to Borkum, a short, wonderful journey to an island that still carries the wildness of the North Sea in its heart. There, I met an artist named Sophie who did something unusual. She carved enormous sculptures from sand. Sophie was young, perhaps 35 or 40, with hair that was always slightly matted from salt water. She worked on Borkum's beach every day, from early morning until sunset. Sand was everywhere on her, in her shoes, in her hair, between her teeth, but she smiled about it as if it were part of her artist's identity. She'd originally come from Berlin, had a good job, an apartment, a normal career. Then, one summer, she visited Borkum, and everything changed. She recognized that she belonged here, that the sand was calling to her, that sculptures were waiting inside her to be shaped. Her sculptures were breathtaking. The day I visited, she was working on a figure 10 meters high that looked like a transformation artist, arms pointing to the sky, a face carved from the sand with every line and emotion perfectly captured. You can picture her working with her tools, the waves rhythmically roaring in the distance, warm sand beneath her feet as she circled the sculpture. That day, she'd already worked on this piece for 2 weeks. She told me she'd need at least 4 more weeks, perhaps 5. And then, after all that time, the sea would take it back, the wind and tides would transform it, and it would dissolve into sand again. That wasn't tragic, Sophie said. It was a dance between human and nature, between form and formlessness, between what we make and what nature does with our making. The most interesting thing about Sophie's work was that everything was temporary. These beautiful, enormous artworks she spent weeks on would be destroyed in a few months by the tides, rain, and wind. She knew that. Every artwork was a dialogue with time, a prayer to impermanence. There was no vanity there, no hope for immortality. Sophie understood something many artists never grasp, that forgetting is part of beauty, that the fleeting nature of things makes them precious. She told me that was the beauty of it. People who saw her sculptures didn't regard them as something eternal. They saw them for what they were, a moment, a gift, an encounter with beauty that wouldn't last. That made every sculpture more precious because it was fleeting. Sophie worked with simple tools, a large brush to bring water to the sand, a wooden frame to carve the rough forms, smaller tools of metal and wood to create the details. Her hands were strong and sun-browned, her nails short and practical. These were the hands of a craftswoman, an artist intimate with her materials. She could feel the weight of the sand in her hands, could recognize the right moisture by touch before she even used the tools. Her eyes knew every angle, every curve she wanted to shake. On that hot summer day as I watched her work, the sun was cruel and beautiful. The blue water of the North Sea sparkled like liquid sky, white sails visible on the horizon, gliding slowly past as if the boats had all the time in the world. Gulls wheeled in the midday heat, their cries mixing with the crash of the waves. The warm wooden boards of the harbor pier beneath my feet felt like an anchor point in the world. Sophie worked with concentration, almost meditation. She took long pauses to observe her work, to watch how the light fell on the sculpture, how the shadows emphasized the contours. She told me sand was a living material, that it changed with temperature, that moisture affected everything. To create good sculptures, you had to understand the language of sand. Some days it was too dry to work. Some days the sun was too hot and the surface became hard as concrete. Sophie had to dance with the rhythm of the island, not fight against it. A family passed while I was there, children who stopped in wonder when they saw the massive figure. Their eyes grew wide. A little girl asked how long the sculpture would stay there. Sophie sat down at eye level with the child and patiently explained that nature would change everything, that the sculpture would one day simply be gone, swallowed by the sea, by time. The girl didn't seem sad about that, but rather relieved. Sophie told her that didn't mean the sculpture was unimportant. It just meant it was special. The special things are always brief. That's life's secret. The girl nodded, as if understanding something deep about the world. And Sophie smiled, knowing that child had learned something more important than any school lesson. She'd understood that beauty doesn't need to last forever to be real beauty. Sophie also showed me photographs of her earlier works. In the pictures, I could see how she'd grown over the years, how her skills had refined, how she'd become bolder in her designs. Some sculptures were abstract, others figurative. Some told stories from Norse mythology, others were pure dreams in sand. There was a series from her first year showing how clumsy she'd still been, how bold and fresh. Later, she became more technical, more assured, but also less surprising. Then, at some point, she found her way back to that freshness, that boldness, but now with 10 years of experience behind it. Sophie asked me if I knew that life is actually the same as her sculptures, that we all create something every day with our lives, with our choices, with our dreams, and that artwork we shape every day ends up disappearing when we die. But that doesn't mean it's meaningless. It means it's sacred because it's fleeting. Impermanence isn't the opposite of meaning. It's the heart of it. She also told me about the moments when a sculpture starts to crumble, when the sea first really works on it, when wind erodes the first edges. Many artists would despair, would try to save it, but Sophie watched this process with a kind of awe. She saw how nature and her art worked together, how the original plan transformed into new, unexpected forms. Sometimes, when the sculpture was half destroyed, the result was even more beautiful than at the start, because nature had left her mark, her signature, added her art. And now, as the train brings you from Emden to Borkum, as the island grows larger, as the North Sea calls its rough voice to you, you can picture Sophie standing on the beach again tomorrow, beginning a new sculpture, burying her hands in sand, creating something beautiful from something meant to last only a moment. You can imagine there are people who understand that not everything needs to be eternal to be valuable, that the most fleeting things sometimes teach the most. Sophie's work is a quiet rebellion against our culture of permanence, against our fear of forgetting, against our obsession with the lasting. She tells us, with every sculpture, with every artwork she creates and that disappears again, that life itself is an artwork that emerges and fades every moment. And if you understand that, if you take that into your heart, then every moment becomes more precious. Then every encounter becomes more sacred. Then your own life becomes a sand sculpture, beautiful precisely because it isn't eternal. As Sophie said goodbye to me, the important thing isn't what we leave behind, but how we're present while we're here. The sculptures are just metaphors for how we all exist. We're all fleeting, but that doesn't make us less valuable. It makes us more valuable because we know time is limited. That's how Sophie lives every day, like a sand sculpture, beautiful, fleeting, full of meaning.
Imagine yourself on the train from Wolgast to Heringsdorf, and the air turns salty. The air grows light. You're heading to the island of Usedom, to a woman named Edith who owns a small beach house and rents beach baskets. Sounds simple, doesn't it? Let me tell you how wonderful a simple life can be. Edith was about your age, let's say, and she'd bought that house 30 years ago. A modest place with green paintwork and windows looking out to sea. Every summer came families, couples, older folk who wanted to spend a day at the beach, who wanted to feel sand between their toes, who wanted to hear the crash of the waves. And Edith's job was to give them the perfect beach basket. It wasn't just work for her, it was a calling. She understood that people came to the beach to heal their souls, and the baskets were her tools for that. These beach baskets are German classics, you see. Wonderful red and white, or blue and white, or green and white baskets with cushioned seats where you could sit for hours imagining you'd traveled back to the 19th century. Edith had about 50 of them, each with a name, each with a story. One was called the Sea Grenadier, another the Crochet Summer, a third the Secret. She hadn't invented these names. She'd adopted them from her guests, from children who named the baskets, from older people who felt at home in them. The baskets themselves were old craftwork that Edith had tended over the years. Some dated from the early days of her business, restored and repaired, but never discarded. She had a special workshop behind her house where she maintained the baskets, stitched new cushions, refreshed the paint. It was quiet, meditative work. Edith said she loved those baskets, the way one person might love another, that each basket had a soul, a story, a personality. Some were better for quiet folk, others suited lively families. She knew her baskets better than her own relatives. She told me how each morning she'd fetch the baskets from her little storage shed, how she'd position them on the warm sand, how she'd plump the cushions, how she'd check everything until it was exactly right. The sand was warm beneath her feet as she moved between the baskets at 8 in the morning, before the sun became brutal. You can picture the salt smell in the air, the gulls already busy searching for breakfast. Edith had a ritual she repeated every morning. She'd stand near the baskets and breathe in deeply, thanking the day, thanking the beach, thanking the sea for being so beautiful again. The summer days in Edith's beach house followed a particular rhythm. 7 o'clock she was awake. 8 o'clock the baskets stood on the sand. 9 o'clock the first guests arrived. They came with towels, with picnic baskets, with children shrieking with excitement. Edith had a gift for knowing which family needed which basket. A family with small children got one near the access point, so the parents could keep watch. An elderly couple got one near the facilities, so the walk wasn't too far. She observed her guests, understood their needs without them asking. It was a gentle kind of clairvoyance that only comes to those who've spent decades listening. On a particularly hot day when I was there, I watched her speak to a young woman who'd come alone. Edith's eyes were gentle. Perhaps she recognized something in that woman, some loneliness, something of the search for healing that brings people to the beach. She gave her a basket in the perfect spot, not too far from other people, but not too close either. A place where you could feel safe. Later, I asked Edith about that woman. She simply said she knew this person needed to be alone, but not abandoned.
It was the same with many others. The beach basket wasn't just furniture. It was a kind of therapist. The warm wooden boards of the harbour pier felt familiar beneath my feet as Edith showed me her beach house. It wasn't luxurious, but it was cared for. Everywhere were photographs of former guests, pictures on the walls showing people relaxed in their baskets, children building sandcastles, life having its simple, beautiful moments. Edith also showed me a large notebook where she'd made small notes about her guests. Not names, but memories. "The family with the red windmill came again," she'd written. "The dog slept the whole time." Other notes were from summers long past. It was an archive of happy moments. The notebook stretched back to her first summer, 30 years ago. Some entries made Edith laugh. Others made her cry. She read me a story about a couple who came every year for 15 years, until they moved to Munich. They still sent Edith postcards. What impressed me most was that Edith understood she wasn't renting beach baskets. She was selling contentment. She gave people the space they needed to recharge their souls. On hot days, when the sun turned the blue water to liquid light, when white sails slowly passed on the horizon, when gulls wheeled overhead in the midday heat, when the rhythm of the waves sounded like the heartbeat of the world. In those moments, Edith's beach basket held people. She worked every day in summer, from early June through late August. Sometimes rain came, sometimes it was too cold, but Edith was there, arranging her baskets, looking after her guests, the quiet keeper of these small, happy moments. I asked Edith if she never grew tired of doing the same thing every year, setting up the same baskets, reaching out the same hands. She laughed and told me that every year brought something new. New faces, new stories, new moments of happiness she witnessed. Some guests came year after year, became friends. Others came once in a lifetime and perhaps carried their happiness home in a suitcase full of memories. Edith said that continuity, that year after year, was actually the beauty of it. Not the variety, but the depth that comes from repetition. Edith's life wasn't spectacular. No grand adventures, no world-changing successes, but it was full of depth, of meaning, of the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd lived their life the way they could love it. Every day was a chance to make the world a little more beautiful. Every basket an opportunity to give someone a piece of happiness. And perhaps that's the highest purpose a life can have. Not to be famous, but to be present. Not to create great works, but to make holy the small moments. And now, as the train brings you from Wolgast to Heringsdorf, as the Baltic comes ever closer, you can picture Edith setting out her baskets again tomorrow, welcoming a family, helping a child find their place. You can imagine that every beach basket is a small home for a day, a safe place for dreaming, for resting, for loving. And Edith is the keeper of those dreams. There's something wonderful about a woman who decided not to travel, not to strive, but to stay here, in this small house with her baskets, year after year. She might have had children, might have built a career, might have traveled the world. But she chose this simple life, this closeness to nature, this daily meeting with other people's happiness. And perhaps that's a deeper wealth than all the travels in the world could ever give.
Edith's secret is that she doesn't try to do great things. She simply tries to be present every day, to observe, to listen, to give. And from this quiet presence, from this focus on the small and simple, something deep emerges, something meaningful. Every beach basket becomes a work of art. Every guest becomes a relationship. Every summer becomes a memory that lasts forever in the hearts of those who know her. Let me tell you about a journey from Rijeka to Split, a train line running along the Croatian coast, where the Adriatic is so blue you'd think the water had invented light itself. And there, in that beautiful landscape, I met a woman named Mira, a pearl farmer whose story reads like a fairy tale that somehow became real. Mira worked with black pearls. Not the white gleaming pearls you might know, but the dark, mysterious ones that came from a particular type of oyster. You can picture her taking her boats out into the warm Adriatic, the sand warm between her toes when she tended the oyster pools, the rhythmic crash of the waves, her constant companion. The sun burned on her shoulders, the air thick with salt smell, so strong and real it tasted like memory. Her family had been in this work for 3 generations, back to her grandmother's time, the woman who first learned how to farm black oysters. She told me her grandmother was her teacher, even though the old woman had been gone for years now. She worked by her grandmother's methods, but improved them with modern knowledge. The black oysters were delicate creatures, needing exactly the right temperature, the right salinity, the right feed. Mira was mother to them, nurse, artist, and scientist all at once. She could look at any single oyster and know how it fared, what it needed. Mira told me the black pearls were a gift from the Adriatic, and she saw herself as a steward of that gift, not an owner. She wanted to farm her oysters so they lived long, lived well, produced many pearls. It wasn't about profit for her. It was about the craft, about continuity, about the tradition her grandmother had begun and that she meant to pass forward. In a world growing faster and shallower by the day, Mira was a lighthouse of depth, patience, and real beauty. Working with oysters isn't simple. It's art, science, and meditation all woven together. Mira farmed her black oysters with the patience of someone who understands that true beauty can't be hurried. You must wait, you see. Weeks, months, sometimes years before the pearl grows, before it takes its perfect shape and color. Mira told me about one pearl that took 12 years before it was dark and lustrous enough. 12 years. And then it became one of the most beautiful pieces of jewelry ever to grace a neck. She told me how she'd place young oysters in her pools, how she'd monitor the water temperature, the salinity, the pH, all those scientific details that sound like sorcery if you don't know what they mean. But for Mira, it wasn't sorcery. It was love. The same love you feel raising a child, the same attention, the same hope. She knew her oysters individually, could tell which were healthy, which were troubled. Sometimes she'd speak to them, murmur encouragement, as if they might understand what she was saying. Black pearls were precious not just for their luster, but for their rarity, and because each one carried a story. Mira knew her oysters. Can you imagine? She could tell which pool a pearl came from, in which year the oyster had taken the grain, how long it took for the pearl to come full. Some took 8 years to mature, 8 years of care, tending, devotion. When a pearl was finally ready, Mira would hold it to the light, and sometimes she'd weep. Not from sadness, but from a deep gratitude that she'd been allowed to create this wonder, that nature had given her this treasure. One day, Mira took me out on one of her patrol runs. The water was warm as bath water, the light so bright and crystalline you could see the structure below. The rocks, the seaweed waving like green fingers from the bottom. White sails were visible on the horizon, old sailboats looking like ghosts from another time. Gulls wheeled overhead in the midday heat, loud and hungry. Mira's boat was small but sturdy. It smelled of salt water and oil and something ancient that only the sea possesses. She knew the water the way a child knows home, without thinking. She showed me the oyster pools, great nets holding hundreds of shells waiting for the tiny grain of irritant she'd carefully planted in them to transform into something beautiful. Mira spoke to the oysters as she checked them, quietly and soothingly, the way you'd speak to babies. She tested the water with her instruments, made notes in a large notebook yellowed by salt spray. These notebooks stretched back 40 years, one book each year, each book full of details, full of life, full of history. It was like an encyclopedia of black pearls. I asked if it was hard, not knowing whether the pearl would prove truly valuable in the end, whether all those years of work would repay themselves. She smiled at me, and in that smile, I saw the whole Adriatic, the whole sky, all the love for nature that lived in this woman. She told me that uncertainty makes the beauty, that the not knowing, the waiting, the hoping, that's what makes life worth living. Every black pearl that became jewelry was more than a product. It was a miracle, a tiny piece of ocean that had transformed itself into something lustrous and mysterious. The warm wooden boards of her harbour pier felt solid beneath my feet like the spine of trust. There was a peace there, a certainty that came from watching someone do their work with absolute devotion. No rushing, no impatience. Only the warm sun, the blue water, the black pearls growing in their shells, and Mira watching over everything with the care of a master. Mira told me that not all oysters produce a pearl. Some reject the grain, some die before the pearl is finished. That's the rhythm of nature, she said. You can't control it. You can only accept what comes. She loses perhaps 15% of her oysters each year. That sounds tragic, but Mira doesn't see tragedy in it. She sees natural law. The oysters that survive, that form their pearls, are the strongest, the most perfect. The black pearls that emerge are precious because so many obstacles were overcome, because life itself flowed through them. She also showed me how the process begins. She'd take a tiny grain from another shell, an irritant, something to vex the oyster, and place it carefully in the open shell. The process was delicate, demanded skill, memory, experience. Then the oyster, over years, would coat this vexing grain with nacre, would transform it, would layer upon layer make it softer, more lustrous, more beautiful, until finally it became a wonderful black
pearl. It's an alchemy, Mira said. A transformation of something irritating into something beautiful. And perhaps that's what life does with us too. And now, as the train travels the long stretch from Rijeka to Split, as the Croatian coast slides past you, you can picture Mira setting out again tomorrow, checking her oysters, waiting and trusting and loving. You can imagine that somewhere in the warm Adriatic, a black pearl is growing, a tiny wonder that's been patiently waiting for years to fulfill its destiny. And perhaps someday, someone will wear that pearl round their neck and never know what story, what love, what years lie within it. Before I left, Mira gave me a small black pearl as a remembrance, as a gift. She told me it took 5 years to become what it is. 5 years in darkness, in the depths of the sea, until finally it came to light. Now it lies in my pocket, and I know that within it lives a love greater than its size, that the whole Adriatic lives there, the whole sky, the whole trust of a woman in nature and in time. This pearl is more than a piece of jewelry. It's a testimony that patience bears fruit, that love transforms, that something painful can become something beautiful. When I look at it, I think of Mira, of the warm Adriatic, of the black oysters in their pools, of the hope contained in every layer of the growing pearl. Picture yourself on the train from Verona to Venice, and the sun sinking slowly over those Italian hills. Let me tell you about a woman I met down at the harbor, a German researcher with sunburnt arms and a smile that reminded you of the Mediterranean itself. Her name was Silke, and she gathered seaweed. Not in any casual way, mind you, but with a passion that only belongs to people who've realized that the finest things often hide just beneath the surface. You can imagine her going out each morning, before the heat became crushing, before the midday sun hung over the water like a glowing eye. The water was warm around her feet, salt on her lips, and everywhere the rhythm of the waves, that ancient song the sea has been singing for thousands of years. She knew that pulse, that heartbeat, the way a mother knows her child's breath. Every day brought surprises, new discoveries, new possibilities. She gathered red seaweed, green seaweed, brown seaweed with long fronds that drifted like hair in the salt water. Each type had its own flavor, its own worth. Some went to the food industry, others to cosmetics, and some were reserved for her research at the university in Venice, where she traveled once a week. You can picture her knee-deep in the water, warm sand between her toes, while her hands gently coaxed the seaweed from the rocks. Not too hard, not too fast. Everything done with a respect for nature that only comes to those who truly understand we're part of something greater than ourselves. She'd learned years ago that you don't exploit the sea, you listen to it. The seaweed would tell you when it was ready to be harvested. You just had to know how to watch, had to develop that proper feel for it. Silke told me about her early days at the Mediterranean. She'd come 30 years ago as a young German researcher, full of idealism and precious little experience. Back then, she lived in a tiny flat, earned little, worked much. But it was the happiest time of her life, she said, because she could do what she loved.
Every gathering of seaweed was like a conversation with the sea. Every experiment was a question put to nature. Over the years, she'd developed methods that were recognized internationally, won prizes, become a consultant to major companies. But she'd remained the same at her core, in her heart. Still, she rose each morning and went out to the water. Still, she gathered with her own 2 hands. Her eyes would shine when she spoke of the sea, the seaweed, her work. It was obvious she didn't work for the money, though she earned well enough. She worked because it was her life, because without that work, without that connection to the sea, she couldn't truly live. And that's the difference between someone with a job and someone with a calling. Silke had a calling. The most interesting part of Silke's work was that she didn't simply take. She cultivated, she tended, she made sure the stocks regenerated. In protected pools along the shore, she ran experiments, tested new methods of sustainable harvesting. She told me the seaweed was full of minerals, full of nutrients that the sea had gathered over millions of years and now held concentrated in these delicate plants. Calcium, magnesium, iodine, trace elements you don't even know you need until you're without them. Sometimes, she said, the seaweed is like the library of the sea, full of knowledge gathered over centuries. Each molecule carried a story that might be hundreds of years old. The day I met her, she'd just finished processing a new harvest. She showed me the dried seaweed, sorted by color and size, spread across great nets under the sun. The taste was salty and sharp together, with a hint of something sweet that came from the minerals. You can imagine standing on those wooden boards of the harbor pier, watching them sway slightly whilst she explained everything, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. She showed me her notebooks too, where she'd meticulously documented every harvest, temperature, salinity, growing conditions. 30 years of work recorded there. 30 years of knowledge, gathered layer upon layer, like the seaweed itself. She spoke of the cosmetics manufacturers who bought her seaweed because they knew real quality was in that harvest. No industrial production with artificial additives, but genuine craftsmanship from someone who understood the sea the way you understand your own hands. And then she told me of the food producers who made powder from it for desserts, seaweed pasta, even seaweed oil for cosmetics and remedies. Some customers came from all over the world, wrote her letters telling how her products had changed their lives. One woman from Germany had written that Silke's seaweed powder had transformed things for her. Silke read me the letter in a quiet, moved voice. But the best thing about Silke's story is that she's still learning, still experimenting, still filled with wonder about the sea after all these years. She told me the seaweed still teaches her something new each day, that the sea never stops surprising her. She has no illusions of knowing everything about seaweed, quite the opposite. The more she learns, the more she realizes how much remains unknown. And that's the secret of her happiness. She stays open to nature's mysteries, doesn't try to control everything, just watches and learns and loves. But what I noticed most of all in her voice was that the business side wasn't the heart of it. The heart was that she loved the sea. She loved those warm summer days when the sun turned the blue water to liquid gold, when white sails appeared on the horizon and the gulls wheeled overhead in the midday heat, loud and alive. She loved working with the seaweed because it connected her to the sea, to the old history of the coast, to something timeless. Sometimes, she said, when the sun went down and the water turned orange and red, she'd simply stand there and thank the sea. Thanked it for letting her be part of its story, for giving her this gift. And now, as the train moves through the dusk between Verona and Venice, you can picture Silke venturing out again tomorrow into that warm water, gathering her seaweed, honoring the nature that surrounds her. You can imagine that every product born from her work carries a little piece of love for the sea, an echo of the waves that break against the Italian coast. And perhaps you feel warm yourself. Perhaps you feel sand between your toes. Perhaps you smell the salt and hear that ancient roar of the sea in your own ears. There's something special about people like Silke. People who've understood that work done with the hands, work done with patience, work done with love, is a form of meditation. Her life isn't complicated. It's wonderful in its simplicity. Morning comes, the sun rises, the sea waits, the seaweed waits, and Silke gets up and does her work with a full heart. If you asked her, she'd tell you she wouldn't want to be anywhere else in the world, couldn't imagine any other life. The Mediterranean has become part of her, and she's become part of the sea. She breathes its air, tastes its salt, thinks in its rhythms. And that's enough. That's all you need to be happy. And the landscape outside grew softer. The outlines of trees dissolved, the fields became dark shapes, and the moon sometimes slid its pale light across them. I felt my breathing slow, my heart slow, my whole body sinking down into the warm embrace of the seat, the warm embrace of this train, carrying me without any effort on my part. It was a good feeling, a rare feeling, to be carried, without struggle, simply trusting that the wheels keep turning, that the rails lead somewhere, that morning will come. It's December, and the train travels from Zvolen to Poprad through the Slovak mountains. The snow is deep here, meters deep, and the forests are like black shadows under a white blanket. In the windows of the houses the train passes, you see candles. Candles everywhere, fighting the darkness. Beside you sits a woman whose hands smell of beeswax, sweet and warm as honey. She wears a dark brown dress, almost like a nun's habit, and around her neck hangs a rosary of wooden beads. Her name is Agata, and for 30 years she's made candles for a Benedictine monastery in Banská Bystrica. She's 49 years old, but her hands look older. The skin is tanned by heat, the fingertips slightly thickened. She shows you a small candle from her bag. It's pure beeswax, not paraffin. The scent is almost redundant. It already smells so sweetly of itself, like honey remembering itself in air. She tells you that real candles for churches can only be made of beeswax. That's an old church law going back to the Middle Ages. Beeswax burned slower, purer, more holily than any other substance. The flame of a beeswax candle is blue and gold, never grey. She has a direct contract with beekeepers from the Carpathians who supply her hundreds of kilograms of wax each year. Some beekeepers are old, she says, and when they die, she loses a supplier and a friend. She explains the candle-making process, and you realize it's not just a craft, it's a science, almost an alchemy. The wax must be heated to exactly the right temperature. Too hot, and it becomes dark and brittle. Too cold, and it becomes dense and opaque. She uses an old thermometer from the 19th century that her grandfather used, a glass thermometer with fine black lines. The temperature must be between 80 and 90 degrees Celsius, and she knows it through her skin, through intuition, when the wax is properly tempered. She dips the wick into the liquid wax, pulls it out, dips again. With each dip, the candle grows thicker until it reaches the right thickness. As she speaks, you see her eyes drift into the distance, as if she's actually sitting in the monastery's workshop, her hands immersed in the warm wax, her soul already in the church where the candles will later burn. A large part of her work, she says, is wrapping the wicks. These aren't simple cords. They're made of cotton, wound and twisted multiple times, some with small wires to stiffen them. A good wick is like a candle's heart. The wick must know all of the wax's properties, must dance with it as the candle burns. She shows you a bundle of wicks in different thicknesses, thin as thread for small votive candles, thick as a small finger for the great altar candles that must burn for up to 18 hours. She treats the wicks like living things, rolling them gently, testing their elasticity, their structure, as if helping a plant to grow. The monastery she works for is very old, she tells you, built in the 13th century. The church there is beautiful, with stone columns so thin you'd think they could break, but they're made of hard limestone, held by the same vaults for 800 years. The windows are old glass, some from the original century, and when the sun shines through them, it colors the walls blue and red and green. Every Sunday when Mass begins, the nuns light dozens of candles, and Agatha's candles burn there, spreading their sacred scent, casting their moving light on the faces of believers. She has the privilege of attending Sunday Mass when she delivers candles. She sits in a side aisle and watches her candles burn, sees how they fulfill their task, how the light fills the air, how the scent opens hearts. She tells of special commissions she receives. Once, a bishop from Rome visited the monastery, and the abbess ordered 100 special candles for the ceremony. Agatha worked 3 weeks without stopping. She made candles with special scents, frankincense, myrrh, benzoin. She formed the candles in different heights, all perfectly proportioned, all perfectly symmetrical. When the bishop entered the church and saw 100 candles burning just for him, he wept. The abbess told Agatha about it later. An old woman had wrought the miracle of 100 burning candles, from nothing but beeswax and patience. Her daily ritual in the workshop is ritualistic, she says. She arrives at 5 in the morning, still in darkness, and her first act is lighting a fire in her old stove. She says the fire is a kind of prayer for her. She asks the fire to help her make beautiful candles. She heats the wax slowly, never rushed. While she waits, she sings old hymns she learned from the nuns. The nuns say that her voice and the scent of the wax together make a kind of music, that the song of the candles begins long before the first flame is lit. She shows you photographs from her workshop, shelves full of candles, endless rows of creamy, golden white pillars. In one corner sits a large table covered with piles of wicks, scissors, and old spent candles she'll melt again. Nothing is thrown away, she says. These wax is too precious.
A used wick becomes tinder for new fires. An imperfect candle is melted down and new candles are made from it.
The train continues through the snow-covered landscape. Agata shows you Poprad on the horizon, the town where the train ends. She says she takes this train at least once a month, always with candles, always with new deliveries for the monastery. The conductors all know her, ask how the candles burn, if the nuns are satisfied. There's an intimacy in this routine, she says. The train is like a living companion on her journey. She shows you a special box in which she transports her candles. The box is made of cedar wood, lined inside with straw so the candles don't break. She tells of a young novice who came to her wanting to learn candle making. The girl was lost, says Agata. She had no place in the world. But in the workshop, with beeswax in her hands, with the scent in the air, the girl came alive again. She's been a nun for 10 years now, and she makes candles with Agata. She's learned that craft is a form of love, that making beautiful things for others heals you. That's the greatest gift Agata gave that girl. Not knowledge of candles, but knowledge of purpose. The last thing Agata says to you before you fall asleep is, "Every candle you see was once liquid light in the hands of someone who loved it." When you see a candle, remember that you see that person's light burning for you. That's the secret. We don't make candles. We make love in solid form. The snow begins falling more thickly, and the scent of beeswax mingles with the scent of snow and evergreen. Your eyelids grow heavy, and you see 100 candles burning in a dark church. All for you, all warmth, all hope, all prayer. It's January, and the train travels from Sjófok to Balaton Furrier along Lake Balaton. This is Hungary's largest lake, and in winter it becomes a white plain, a frozen world without borders. The sun sits low on the horizon, staining the lake orange and red. Beside you sits a woman with eyes like ice itself, grey, inscrutable, but with a glimmer in them, as if sunlight breaks through. She wears a thick, hand-knitted sweater, and her hands are red from frost. Her name is Heinalka, and she's lived her whole life by Lake Balaton. She's 73 years old, and every winter since she was 16, she's drilled holes in the ice and fished. She shows you her tools, a hand drill of wood and steel, designed so long ago that no one knows exactly when it was invented. The blade is sharp as a razor, and the spindle has been hand-polished until it's smooth as silk. She tells you this drill has been in her hands for 43 years. She inherited it from her father, and before her father had it, the drill was already old. She's carved the names of 3 generations of men into the drill's shaft: her grandfather, her father, and herself. She won't carve her daughter's name there, she says sadly, because her daughter doesn't want to fish. But perhaps her granddaughter will one day. The art of ice fishing, she says, isn't really fishing. It's waiting. It's meditation. You make a hole in the ice, and that can be surprisingly difficult when the ice is more than 60 centimeters thick. And then you sit and wait. You wait for a fish that may or may not come. She describes the drilling process with almost poetic precision. First, you must open the hole with warm water to soften the ice. Then you take the drill and turn it in circles,
The drill sinks slowly into the ice, centimeter by centimeter, sometimes taking hours. Your hands must stay warm, but not too warm, because if they're too warm, they become dry and lose their strength. She shows you her wrists. The skin is cracked and dark red from decades of contact with cold water and ice.
She shows you photographs of herself at the lake, images from different decades.
In a 1975 photo, she's young, laughing, sitting on the ice with a rod in her hands. Beside her lies a large pike on the ice, its scales glinting like jewels. In another photo, from 5 years ago, she's still sitting there, older but no less alive, her eyes as bright as 50 years before. The lake hasn't changed, she says. That's the beauty of the lake. It doesn't change. In summer there are boats. In winter there's ice. It's constant, reliable, divine. She tells you the lake was her doctor when she was young and had a broken heart. The lake told her no words, but it helped her simply by being still. Later, when her wife died, she fished every day in winter to stay in contact with her.
She tells of dangerous days when the ice is unreliable. Most people don't venture onto the ice when it's thin, but Hanalka knows the ice like a lover knows their beloved's body. She knows where it's safe, where the ice is deeper, where it grows shallower. She's developed a feeling for it, a sixth sense. She has a stick she throws ahead of her, and if the stick breaks through the ice, you know your body weight would too. It's a cruel method, but it works. Once, she tells you, the ice was too thin. That was 20 years ago. She undressed, keeping only her undergarments and undershirt. She threw her stick, heard the ice crack. She was ready to swim, but the ice held. She crawled forward, centimeter by centimeter, until she felt firmer ground beneath her. She fished that day. An old pike, she says, rewarded her boldness. The fish was as old as she was, grey as stone, wise as a monk. The train moves on, and you see small houses along the lake shore. Hanalka points to one of the huts. That's her fishing house, she says, just 3 minutes' walk from Shufok station. She spent the night there hundreds of times, when she'd go out on the ice at dusk and stay until sunrise. The hut has a stove, a small kitchen, a narrow bed. She spent as much time there as in her real house. The lake is her true home, she says. She tells of a great pike she caught in 1987. The fish was huge, perhaps 2 meters long, with teeth like small daggers. She fought with it for 4 hours. Her hands bled from the line, her arms ached, but she didn't give up. A boy playing nearby ran to the police, thinking she was dying. The police came, but didn't intervene. They said it was her battle. When she finally pulled the fish from the hole, it was so heavy she couldn't lift it alone. The boy and a police officer helped her. They ate the fish for dinner, and it was the best meal she's ever had. She shows you an old fishing line from her bag, inherited from her grandfather. The line is made of silk, hand-knotted, and might be 100 years old. She still sometimes fishes with it, though modern lines are better. She fishes with it out of love, not practicality. The old line reminds her of her family, of the long lines of fishermen and fisherwomen who stood at the lake before her. She tells you also of the wild winters, when the lake becomes a playground. People come from all over the region to skate or simply walk. Hanalka watches them all, these temporary visitors, and thinks to herself, They're here for a day. I'm here for a life. The solitude of ice fishing is not sad. It's sacred. A kind of prayer spoken with the hands and answered by the heart. When the wind sweeps across the ice, it carries the voices of generations. Her grandmother still fishes with her, Heinalka says, though she died 40 years ago. Her aunt, too. The lake is both a cemetery and a sanctuary. The train slows as you approach Balaton Furrier. Heinalka gazes out at the lake, now darkening to deep blue in the twilight. She says she'll go to the lake tomorrow, that she'll always go to the lake as long as she can walk. When she can't walk anymore, she'll sit on the shore and watch others fish. She'll always be part of the lake. The lake will always be part of her. The boundaries between the fisherwoman and the lake have long since disappeared. She gives you a small bottle filled with water from Lake Balaton. She says, "The water is from winter, from the ice. It's the lake in its purest form. Drink it when you're lonely. The lake will be with you." Your eyes grow heavy, and you see Heinalka no longer as an old woman, but as part of the ice itself. A figure frozen into the lake, watching, waiting, in her own cold, beautiful eternity. Snow falls against the train's windows, and outside you hear church bells ringing from Balaton Furrier. It's early November, and you're on the train from Cluj to Oradea. The light is golden, the silky warm glow of early autumn not yet ready to leave. Beside you sits a woman with hair as white as snow, turning and twisting a piece of straw in her hands, like a magician playing with a wand. You watch her for a while before she notices you and smiles. A smile like burnt almonds, warm and sweet. Her name is Erzsébet, and she comes from Kalotaszeg, a village in Transylvania so small that if you sneeze, the whole town hears your blessing. She's 66 years old, and her whole life she's braided Christmas stars and crowns from straw. You ask why straw, and she shows you a braided star ornament from her bag. It's so delicate, so intricate, that you can barely believe it's made from straw. The colors are golden and copper red, and it seems to glow from within. She tells you that straw is the wood of poor people. In winter, when wood for heating becomes expensive, farmers bring straw from the fields, and it becomes art in their hands. This isn't new, she says. It's old, ancient. Her grandmother did it, her mother did it, and now she does it. She explains how to choose the right straw. It must come from a special variety of wheat that grows in the hills of Kalotaszeg. The straw from this wheat is gold like old coins and thin as human hair. She must dry it in the sun, in the air, until it has the right consistency, flexible enough to bend, but firm enough to hold its shape. That takes weeks. She shows you her collection of straw bundles wrapped in paper, labeled with dates and origins. It's like a library of dried sunlight. She tells you she keeps straw from this year, from last year, from 3 years ago, because different ages do different things. Old straw is brittle but patient. New straw is wild and alive. A star, she says, consists of 32 strands of straw, each as thin as thread. A single star can take 8 to 10 hours of work. Her fingers are yellowed from the straw, her nails rounded from constant braiding. She shows you her hands and says these hands don't grow older. They only grow wiser, faster, more precise. Sometimes, she laughs, her hands can braid a star while she's asleep. She begins braiding a star right before you, and you're hypnotized by the rhythmic movement of her fingers. The straw rustles, a quiet, soothing sound like the earth breathing. Her hands move quickly but not rushed, precise, like a dancer dancing a waltz she's practiced 100 times. For the Christmas markets in Cluj, she braids hundreds of stars and crowns every autumn. She works from September to November without pause. Her daughter helps, and her granddaughter too. It's women's work, passed from woman to woman. It's not difficult, she says. It's just slow. You have to be patient. You have to believe beauty is worth waiting for. She shows you photos of the markets, tables full of her stars and crowns, people buying them with happy faces, decorating their homes. A customer came back, she tells you, 10 years later, bringing photos of his house where her stars still hung, older now, but no less beautiful. The train travels through the mountains, and the landscape becomes more dramatic. You see villages that seem carved into the hillsides, little houses with roofs that will disappear under snow. Erzsébet shows you the region on a map in her bag. These tiny villages with their unpronounceable names. She says each village has its own straw braiding tradition, but Kalotaszeg is the heart, the center of this craft in the region. In December, she says, stars are tied to large Advent wreaths, and they decorate churches and people's homes. The Christmas markets in Cluj are famous throughout Eastern Europe, and the stars from Kalotaszeg are the most sought-after objects there. People don't buy them as decoration. They buy them as part of their soul, of spiritual Advent. She tells of an order she receives every year from the same monastery in Oradea. The monastery needs 100 large stars for its Advent celebration, and each star must be perfect. She spends an entire month making only for this monastery, sitting day after day, her hands working, her thoughts praying. When she delivers the stars, the nuns invite her for tea, and they sit together, singing old Christmas carols from the 15th century. That's her favorite work of the year, she says, because at the end there's music, not just silence. The nuns treat her like a sister, she says. She shows you a photo of the monastery, a beautifully preserved building from the 18th century, with windows glowing with warm, golden light. A special commission came last year, she tells you, from a woman in America. This woman was Romanian, but grew up in the USA. She wanted 30 stars, but not like ordinary stars. She wanted each star to have a different pattern, each star to represent a year of her life. Erzsébet worked for 3 months on this project, creatively, inventively, sometimes in despair because she had to find the right pattern for the year I saw my mother again. The woman wept when she received the stars. You notice your breathing slow. Erzsébet continues braiding as she speaks with you, her hands working automatically, as they've worked countless times before. She speaks of the qualities of different straws, how thick straw is rigid, thin straw flexible, how heat transforms straw, how water ruins it. She has a feeling for this the way someone has a feeling for music. She knows what each piece of straw wants, where it will bend. A star, she says when finished, is proof of patience. It's proof that slow craft, old techniques, handmade beauty still natter. In a world that wants everything fast, makes everything fast, throws everything away fast, a braided straw star is proof of the opposite. It says, someone took time for you. Someone wanted you to have something beautiful. She shows you the nearly finished star in her hands. It's so delicate it looks like a dream made of light. The train slows as you approach Oradea. Erzsébet puts the star down and looks out at the increasingly dark mountains. She says she takes this train at least 10 times a year, always with her stars, always on the way to a market or delivery. The train has become her second home. She knows the conductor, the other passengers, every stop. She says the best time to braid is on the train. The rhythm of the rails soothes her hands. She shows you a tiny star, perhaps 5 centimeters across, that she wants to give you. You try to refuse, but she presses it into your hand and says, "Take it. It's for your Christmas. But be careful. It's delicate. It needs loving hands." The star is so light that you're not sure if you're holding it still or if it glows of its own accord. The last thing you see before you fall asleep is Erzsébet braiding another star, her old hands moving in a rhythm older than time itself. The train's windows fog over, and outside the world transforms into snow, and the distant sound of church bells from Kalotaszeg. The star in your hand grows warm from your sleep. Imagine you're on a train, early on a winter's day, rattling from Posen toward Bromberg. Outside, fields lie under a fine blanket of snow, and in the windows of passing houses you see the warm orange of lamps fighting the darkness. You lean back, close your eyes for a moment, and when you open them again, there's an older woman beside you, whose hands are work-marked like old leather gloves. Her name is Christina, and for 60 years now she has mended and restored fur coats. In her bag, which seems to be made of the same fur as her work, lie needle and thread, a pair of silver scissors, and samples of different pelts. She tells you that a good fur coat doesn't die. It merely sleeps until someone like her awakens it. You ask what that means, and she smiles while the landscape slides past outside. Her eyes are blue-gray, like settled snow, and when she speaks, her lips move with precision, as if she's told this story 100 times and knows every inflection, every pause. She explains her work like an old medicine. When a coat arrives, and she says almost one comes every day, from women whose grandmothers wore this same coat, she must first examine the fur. Some spots have worn thin, almost transparent to light. Others are so hard and brittle as old bark. She shows you photographs from her workshop, located in an old house just behind the town hall in Posen, and you see dozens of coats on hooks, each a ghost from a different era. The photos are from yesterday, from the day before, from 3 years ago. The place hasn't changed, she says with a wistful smile. The workshop is timeless, and coats come and go like wandering souls visited one last time before they pass into eternity. Her workshop windows face north, she says, which means the light there is never too strong, too harsh. Fur needs cool, gentle light to prevent fading. In winter, when the sun sinks so low it creeps over the city roofs, the light is almost perfect for her work. She sits at her sewing machine then, older than she is, a singer from 1923, and sews new edges onto the sleeve openings where the material has come loose. The rattle of the sewing machine, she says, is like a heartbeat reviving the coat. Every hour she sews, the room fills with the scent of old furs, with the history embedded in the fibers. She lets you touch a scarf she's just repaired. The fur is so soft, it feels like a cloud fallen from the sky. One of her greatest works, she tells you, was a mink coat whose owner had worn it for 60 years. The coat was no longer black, rather a faded brown, like tea steeped too long. But underneath the surface, there was still soul. She had to card the fur, an old procedure, brushing it with a fine wire brush to lift the hairs again. It took 2 weeks. Her hands became raw from the fine dust, and every night she applied cold compresses to ease the pain. The woman who brought the coat was a widow from the old town, and when she picked it up, she wept so hard that Christina silently took her in her arms. This isn't unusual, Christina tells you. People weep when their history comes alive again. You notice that the train journey has exactly the right rhythm for this story. The beat of the train, this constant rumbling, perfectly matches Christina's pace of speaking. She doesn't rush her words, but lets them drop like stones into water. Your breathing slows. She describes how she sews silk lining into a coat, a 16-hour task. The silk must fit perfectly, no wrinkles, no stress on the material. She shows you her hands, smoothed by the work, her finger joints thickened from years of sewing. But these hands, she says, are not destroyed. They are fulfilled. They are grateful. Over the years, she says, she's noticed that each fur has its own personality. A fox fur is proud, almost arrogant in its gleam. A mink is modest and elegant. A beaver is practical and reliable. A marten is curious and daring. This isn't esoteric, she assures you. These are simply the qualities nature gave each animal, and these qualities remain in the fur, even after the animal dies. As she speaks, you see the snowfields outside grow darker. The icicles hanging from the eaves of the passing houses glitter in the fading light like small crystal candles. The day is drawing to a close, and with it, this story, which wraps around you like a fur coat, warming, soothing, timeless. She tells of the women who come to her to have their coats mended. Old women, young women, widows wearing their mother's coat. Some weep when they leave the coat with her, as if entrusting a child. She understands completely. A fur coat is not clothing like any other. It's a statement, a story, proof that you could afford something beautiful, something lasting. In socialist Poland, she says quietly, such things were rare. A woman with a good fur coat was a woman loved by someone, or a woman who'd worked so hard she deserved this luxury. The coat was a secret story on your shoulders. The train ride becomes more rhythmic. Your awareness grows softer. She shows you an old photograph from her handbag. Herself,
perhaps 35, in her workshop surrounded by coats. Her hair is dark brown, her eyes radiant. That was 1980, she says, when the world felt as if it could go any direction. She still has that coat, the one she holds in the photo. It's a mink, silvery, almost shimmering. She never wears it. She only hangs it at her workshop window, where north-flowing light kisses it. The coat is still there, waiting. As all the coats wait. An army of sleeping beauties, simply waiting for someone to awaken them. The snow falls outside more thickly. You hear the soft crunching of snow against the train's windows. And now, she says, as the train slows, you're nearly in Bromberg. Now she teaches her daughter this art. Her daughter is 30, and she works with her mother mending fur coats. It's not glamorous work, not like fashion design or things like that. But it's honest work. It means beautiful things last longer, that resources aren't wasted, that craft and skill still mean something in a world that throws everything away. Her daughter has just sewn a silk lining in a suede coat, something that makes Christina proud. An entire coat, the whole work, done by hand, without a machine. You notice your eyes growing heavy. Christina has stopped speaking and is simply looking out at the darkening landscape. Occasionally you see a village, white roofs with red tiles, smoke rising from chimneys. The smell of wood smoke seems to drift through the windows, though that's not possible. Perhaps it's only your imagination. Christina places her hand on yours, very gently, and says, without looking at you, "You should sleep, my friend. Work done by hand, real work, it fills the mind with rest, not fear. Remember this when you wake. Remember that beautiful things don't have to be young to be precious. Some things become more beautiful as they grow old." The train moves through a long, snowy curve, and with its gentle rocking motion, you sink into a sleep that feels like an old fur coat. Warm, safe, protective. The last thing you hear is the soft rattle of the rails and the distant ring of a church bell announcing evening in Bromberg. On a journey from Zurich to Chur one summer afternoon, when the heat lay like a cloth across the valley and the air shimmered above the tracks, a small boy came into my compartment, perhaps 10 years old, with a rucksack that seemed bigger than he was, and sandals on his feet that had seen better days. He climbed onto the seat across from me, and his legs didn't quite reach the floor, and his feet swung gently in rhythm with the train. He was traveling alone. I saw that straight away, in the way he looked around, not fearful but alert, like someone who's just realized the world works just fine without grown-ups. A small stuffed animal was poking out of his rucksack, grey and well-loved, with one ear flopping down. And he didn't stuff it back in when he noticed me. It belonged. It was part of the journey. And then he unfolded a map. Not a proper map, not a hiking map or a road map, but one he'd drawn himself in colored pencil on a large sheet of paper already creased from many foldings. The mountains were triangles, green and brown, with white peaks. The rivers were blue, wavy lines. The lakes were ovals in turquoise, and here and there he'd drawn little houses, small rectangles with red roofs and windows that looked like faces. He smoothed the map over his knees, and then gazed out the window at the real mountains standing there, grey and green and solid, with patches of snow on the highest peaks despite the summer heat. Then he looked back at his map, at the colored pencil triangles, and his face took on an expression I couldn't quite read. Something between satisfaction and wonder, as if he'd worked out something he couldn't yet put into words.
"Why do trains always run on the same tracks?" he asked, without looking up. "Can't they go somewhere else?" I wondered what to answer. The simple answer would have been, the tracks are there, so they stay there. But the boy didn't seem to be waiting for an answer anyway. He was already looking at his map again, tracing a line with his finger, one he'd drawn in red. A line that wound through the triangles and didn't follow the path of any real railway line. "I think trains could go anywhere," he said then, "if there were no tracks. Maybe they like the tracks. They keep them safe. Like a bed, you know. You don't have to sleep in a bed, but it's nicer." I nodded. The tracks keep the trains safe. That was true. And outside, the sun lay across the Valenze, a surface of light so still it didn't look real. We traveled that way for a while in silence, and the boy looked back and forth between his map and the window, as if he was comparing them both and finding both to be right. Then we came through a valley where cows stood in a meadow, brown and white and motionless in the afternoon sun, and the boy leaned forward and said, "Do you think the cows out there know we can see them?" I looked out at the cows, standing there like figures in a painting, and said, "Perhaps. Perhaps they see us, too." "But they don't think about us," the boy said. "We think about them, but they don't think about us. That's strange." He pointed at his map. "I drew cows here, too. But my map can't fit nearly as many cows as there really are." And he was right. On his map, there were maybe 3 cows, little squiggles with legs and tails that looked like exclamation marks. Out there were dozens, and not one of them thought about us. The boy drank from a small water bottle he had in his rucksack's side pocket. He didn't offer it to me, and I didn't ask. It was his water, and he drank from it as matter-of-factly as an adult drinks his coffee. Eyes closed, and a small sigh afterwards. Then he put the bottle away and said, "Can a mountain get tired?" And now I really did have to think. A mountain getting tired. What would that look like? "Perhaps," I said, "if you stare at a mountain long enough, eventually it looks tired." The boy nodded slowly, as if I'd said something important, though I wasn't sure I had. "The mountains on my map aren't tired," he said. "They're new. But the mountains out there, they could be tired. I don't know how long it takes a mountain to get tired. Maybe 100 years, maybe 1,000. Maybe it never gets tired and just looks that way." We continued on, through a landscape that grew narrower and narrower, the mountains drawing closer, the sky growing thinner between the peaks. The boy folded his map and unfolded it and folded it again. Not nervously, but thoughtfully, as if the folding itself were a way of thinking. After a long while of saying nothing, he laid the map across his lap once more and tapped his finger on a point. Dark, red, bold, as if he'd drawn over it many times. "That's my grandparents' house," he said. "I've never seen it on a real map. Only here." I looked at that red dot. It was a dot like any other on his map,
And at the same time, it was something quite different. It was the reason for the journey, the place everything led to. The triangles and the wavy lines and the little squiggle cows were lovely, but they were the way. The red dot was the destination. The journey continued. The light grew softer. The shadows of the mountains grew longer. The boy grew quieter. His eyelids grew heavier, and his head tilted slowly to one side, millimeter by millimeter, like a falling leaf. The map lay on his lap, and his finger still rested on the red dot, as if holding it fast, even in sleep. I took my jacket and laid it gently over him so he wouldn't wake. The little stuffed animal still poked from his rucksack with its floppy ear and button eyes, and it looked as if it was sleeping too, along with the boy. And outside, the real mountains rolled past, mountains that might grow tired or might not. And the trains ran on their tracks because the tracks keep them safe. And the cows stood in the fields thinking nothing of us. And a small boy slept, his finger pointing to his grandparents' house. And the sun sank lower, and everything grew still and warm and slow. The yellow windows appear like small stars scattered across a black canvas. The night, the cold night, the deep night. You're traveling now between Erfurt and Weimar, and houses emerge from nothing, suddenly visible from the darkness, suddenly there, their windows glowing like small fires, like small hopes, like small promises the night gives. These windows are not cold, not blue-white like the icy light from street lamps, not frigid like the world that surrounds you. They are warm, orange-yellow, the color from inside, the color of life, the color of warmth, the color of human existence, the color of home, the color of hope. You imagine what lies behind these windows, what these lights mean, what these golden squares of glass have to tell. A room, probably, lit by a lamp or several lamps, possibly with people in it, people reading, people watching television, people simply sitting and gazing into the night. Like you as well. Or perhaps the rooms are empty, and the lights switch on automatically to create an illusion of occupancy, to deter burglars, to deceive the night. But it doesn't matter to you whether the rooms are inhabited, whether there are people or only lights, whether there is life or only the illusion of life. What matters is only the fact that there are lights, that there are windows, that there are signs of human presence in this otherwise cold, dark night, that there is evidence of life, of existence, of struggle against the cold, of refusal to surrender to the darkness. A large house rushes past, 2 windows lit, 2 small squares of yellow warmth, 2 small universes, 2 small worlds. The train is moving faster here, faster than it moved through the valleys, faster than through the fields, faster, as if yearning for home, as if eager to push forward. The houses come quicker, the windows follow one another more rapidly, and each is a tiny story, a tiny world, a tiny drama. You try to see the details, try to grasp the truths behind the windows, but you can't. It goes too fast, The world flies by like a film running at too high a speed. You see only the outlines, the shapes, the colors of the windows, and that's enough. More than enough. That's all you need. All you can really see. It's as if the train itself is saying, that's enough. That's everything. That's all you need to know. The windows have something magical about them. Something that attracts you, that draws you in like a magnet draws iron. It's not just the warmth, not just the color, not just the fact that they radiate light into the darkness, that they are fire in the gloom. It's something else, something deeper, something to do with the human soul, with human yearning for warmth, for security, for home, for family, for love. These windows are symbols of all that. Windows into warm rooms, windows into safe places, windows into places where people love, where people laugh, where people sleep, where people dream. Your compartment is warm, yes, but it's not like the warmth behind these windows. The warmth here is neutral, practical, a heating system that does its job with indifference to the person sitting in it. But the warmth behind the yellow windows is different. Different in its essence. Human. Filled with life and emotion and history and experience. You like the heating here. You're grateful for the warmth here. But you envy these people in these houses, who are beneath these roofs, surrounded by these walls, wrapped in this warmth. Some windows are covered with curtains or shutters, thick, dark fabrics filtering the light, and light seeps through the edges like blood from a wound, shimmers at the borders like tears, like the light of a candle through dark curtains. Other windows are completely open, completely unobstructed, and you can see shadowy movement behind them. Perhaps people, perhaps furniture, perhaps only the shadow of a lamp, perhaps only your own reflection watching you, following you. You want to stop, want to get out, want to knock on one of these windows and ask, "May I come in? May I share this warmth? May I be part of this world?" But of course you won't. You won't get out. You won't knock. You won't intrude into these warm rooms. You'll sit here and watch these windows slowly disappear behind you. Watch the lights dissolve into darkness. Watch hope transform into memory. A cluster of houses appears, tightly packed, too many. Probably a small village or a suburb of a larger town. A small civilization resisting the night. Suddenly there are many windows, many lights, an entire network of warm rooms. A whole village of people together in the night, struggling together against the cold. The lights form a picture, a constellation, a pattern, a star map that feels familiar to you, though you've never seen these places before, though this might be your first journey, your last journey, your only journey. It's the pattern of human civilization, the pattern of humanity, the pattern of people living together, warming together, struggling together against the cold, defying the night together. Your window is now completely fogged with ice and condensation, a thick layer of moisture frozen in crystals. You can barely see out, barely see the windows, barely see the hope.
You wipe it away with your hand, with your sleeve, with your will. But it immediately fogs over again. It immediately returns. It refuses to show you what you want to see. It's as if the world outside doesn't want you to see it, wants to ignore you, wants to force you to rest, wants to say, sleep, sleep, sleep. But you persist. You don't give up. You wipe away again and again. You look out again and again. You pursue these windows with your eyes, like a hunter pursues prey, like a lover pursues their beloved, like a child pursues their dream. The windows you see are not all the same, are all different, all unique in their way, all unique in their story. Some are large and open, some are small and hidden. Some in modern houses, 20th century houses, houses that look cool and clean. And some are in old houses, 19th century houses, that look warm and rambling. Some windows are decorated with flower boxes, old boxes, though, of course, flowers don't bloom in winter. The boxes are empty or covered with ice, waiting for spring. Some windows have Christmas decorations, red snowmen, colorful lights, Christmas trees faintly visible behind the glass, garlands framing the window sashes. Winter isn't over. Christmas was just weeks ago, and some people are holding on, still clinging to that warm feeling, still holding on to that hope. The train moves on, faster now, faster, as if growing impatient, as if wanting to tear you away from these windows, as if saying, enough, enough, enough. But you hold on. You refuse to leave. You keep looking, keep following. These windows are your contact with the human world, your proof that you're not alone, that others exist, that there's life outside your train, outside your compartment, outside your quiet mind. A particularly large window rushes past, and behind it you can see an image that stays with you, that burns itself into your memory, that you'll probably forget tomorrow, but that means everything right now. A living room, a family, people sitting together, perhaps a television, perhaps a fire, perhaps only the warmth of each other's presence. Just for a moment, just for a second that feels like an eternity, you can see this image before it's gone, before it vanishes, before it becomes a memory, a phantom, a dream. But this moment is enough. This moment shows you that there is warmth out there, that there is life out there, that there is reason for hope out there, that there are people out there together, loving each other, warming each other, struggling together against the cold. The windows become rarer now, the further the train travels, the faster it moves, the closer it gets to its destination. The houses become rarer, the lights become rarer. Civilization dissolves into the night. People become rarer. Hope becomes rarer. Your eyes are now very heavy, very tired. So tired that you can barely see, barely think, barely breathe. You can hardly stay awake. Your eyelids fall. Your lids close. Your thoughts become diffuse. The windows blur before your eyes, become one continuous ribbon of light, as if you're passing lights at very high speed, as if you're dreaming, as if you're already asleep. The train sings its song, and you try to sing with it.
but your voice is weak, almost gone. An echo.
The last windows disappear behind you, disappear into darkness, disappear into the past, and with them goes your readiness to stay awake, your strength, your hope, your last connection to the outside world. Darkness returns, complete and total. And that's okay. That's good. That's exactly what you need. Your head sinks onto the pillow. Your eyes close completely. Your soul withdraws into the inner world. And the windows become stars in your dreams, become small lights in your inner sky. Stay with you, keep you warm, as the train carries you into the night, as the train carries you home, as the train rocks you into sleep.